Welcome back viewers to CEC-UGC. Welcome back to yet another lecture on this lecture series on the novel A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. My name is Piyush Chaudhary and currently I am working as an assistant professor at the Department of English at Hansraj College, University of Delhi. Now in the previous lectures that we had, we discussed at length the detailed summary of the first 9 parts of The Suitable Boy. As we know, this novel, A Suitable Boy, is written in 19 parts by the novelist Vikram Seth, and in the previous lectures I discussed the summary till part 9. So today in this lecture I will be covering the remaining parts of this massive novel. Now a summary of The Suitable Boy, and I will be covering part 10 to part 19. So let us now begin firstly with part 10 of The Suitable Boy, precisely from the point that we left the previous lectures at. In part 10, in a very subtle way, Vikram Seth shows the communal disturbances between the Hindus and the Muslims in the village. Vikram Seth, actually the author never shows or expresses political or communal views in a very direct manner. Seth never does that. But the overwhelming presence and the overwhelming tensions which was a result of the communal riots in Brahmapur and which was a result of the communal riots and the partition of India is present in the various chapters of the entire part 10 of the novel. For example, part 10.2 of the novel shows that the Muslims have rallied together and are now raising their voices of protest against Mr. L.N. Agarwal, who is the Home Minister. And we know by now that L.N. Agarwal is a very communal Home Minister. He is a communal man and his tactics create unrest between the Hindus and the Muslims in Brahmapur. Then as we move forward in part 10, in part 10.8 we are introduced with Waris. Who is Waris? Waris is the servant of the Nawab and Firoz. So Waris is the same person who will act as a proxy of Mahesh Kapoor. He is the one who is supporting Mahesh Kapoor, but at the end he will contest against Mahesh Kapoor himself. So the village munshi, as we go forward in part 10, the village munshi who was an accountant, he was found beating an old woman whose son tried to get his name recorded in the village records of the land. And on this pretext the munshi started beating the woman very mercilessly, and Man sees this and he attacks the munshi for misbehaving with the old woman, and this puts Man in a very positive light among the villagers. They look at him as a savior. Then as we move forward in part 10.10, we are introduced to the 4-year-old daughter Meher, who is originally the daughter of Rashid's elder brother and is his niece, right? But in this part of the novel we get to know that Rashid's mother asked from a promise on her deathbed that Rashid should marry the widow of his elder brother and secure the family. So this young girl Meher, she often calls Rashid as Chacha Jan instead of Abba Jan, and it is only later on that the mother and the widow of Rashid's mother correct her to refer to him as Abba Jan. So both the widow and Rashid himself are very upset, but Rashid had to fulfill the promise given to his ailing and dying mother on her deathbed. So Rashid is not at all happy or contented, and he remains unhappy looking at the young woman. Then in part 10.13 we get to see Rashid's history as a young boy till his present age. And as we move forward in the novel, we see that Man has spent a few months in the village, and the people of Devariya village, they like him. He is gaining popularity in the village for his friendly nature. And in then part 10.22, the news reaches the father of Rashid that he has tried to remove his own name and had in fact put the name of Khachedu in the official family records at the Patwari office. And upon hearing this, he calls Rashid and then simply dispossesses him from the land ownership and asks him to leave the house. Rashid tries to plead, and he pleads for justice for Khachedu, but his pleas fall on deaf ears as his father is not willing to give any land to Khachedu, even if the new bill passes. So basically what Vikram Seth is doing is, Vikram Seth is showing the loopholes at the village level and how these loopholes were used to bypass the good intentions of the land abolition bill, of the Zamindari abolition bill. So part 10 ends here. We have part 11. Now part 11 begins with the trial scene of the Zamindari abolition bill, where its constitutional validity is being contested by the Raja of Mad and others who are affected by it. It will be discussed in a court of law, and if found not going against the constitution, it will be proclaimed as constitutional, and then the bill will be passed as an act. So in part 11.2 and 11.1 and 11.2, Seth very skillfully captures the essence of judicial arguments and the diction of the courtroom speeches. So the speech patterns, the language of the lawyers, the language of the judges, the courtroom discussions and the arguments are crafted and curated very carefully by the author of the novel. So what Seth does is, Seth captures the essence very clearly and very accurately. And as we know, Seth had researched a lot on these things, and his own mother was a judge in the Delhi High Court, and all this would have definitely helped him recreate the speech patterns and present an extremely realistic account of the courtroom. Then as we move forward in 11.3, the Nawab is informed by Mahesh Kapoor that his own son Firoz also visits Saida Bai's house often, and this disturbs the Nawab greatly. And most of the other part of part 11 talks about the Pul Mela in Brahmapur, and which describes how all of a sudden a stampede occurs there, and Bhaskar, the young boy, he gets separated from the family in the ensuing mayhem. And finally he is saved and admitted to the hospital. Then in part 11.30, the bench of judges pronounce that the bill is not wrong, it is not unconstitutional and does not contravene any provisions of the constitution and is therefore not invalid at all. So Mahesh Kapoor's bill can now be passed in the assembly. Next is part 12. Now in part 12.2, we get to know that it was Kabir who saved Bhaskar, the young boy, from the dangerous stampede and returned him back to the family, to the hospital. And then in 12.5, Kabir writes a letter to ask Lata to attend the Brahmapur Literary Society meeting in the college. Lata in return writes a note to Kabir informing him that there is no point in their meeting and that they should avoid seeing each other. And however, in the next part they somehow meet in the college, because ultimately it is difficult for both of them to ignore each other when they are both students of the same college. Then in part 12.14, Maan returns back to his house Brahmapur. He comes back to Brahmapur and he first visits Firoz and then visits Saida Bai's house. So we also get to know that Rashid has his eyes on Tasneem and that she did not like it, that is Saida Bai did not like it. Maan next suggests that Firoz, the Nawab's son, can be a suitable boy for Tasneem, the sister of Saida Bai. And upon hearing this, she gets upset all of a sudden and asks Maan to leave the house immediately. So Maan is not sure what wrong he did and he is utterly confused and upset. Then in part 12.22, the students protest against the government and in return the police orders a lathi charge, and due to which a student is badly hit and he is admitted to the hospital. Then in part 12.27, Pran faces an asthma attack and he too is admitted to the hospital. We have part 13 of the novel. Now part 13 of the novel continues the story from where part 12 ended, and in part 13.10, he once again visits Saida Bai but finds out that she will not be entertaining Maan Kapoor tonight. Part 13 also shows Pran admitted to the hospital, and very soon Savita, who is pregnant, and she will also be admitted to the same hospital. So both of them are admitted to different floors, and in a very funny series of events, they both write letter to each other to ask about their health from different floors. Then in part 13.8, the whole family gets into the search of a suitable name for the newborn young girl of Pran and Savita, and after much discussions and argument, they finally decide on the name Uma. Then as the story progresses in part 13.20, Haresh leaves his old job and has now applied at the Praha Shoe Company. We are informed this. So Haresh at this point loses his job and he is unemployed. Part 13.21 goes back in the past a few weeks before Uma's birth. And the next part, that is part 13.22, brings the confrontation between Kabir and Lata. She finally explains to Kabir why they cannot marry. The reason that she mentions is that her family would not allow them to be married ever. So in part 13.23, Haresh writes a letter to Lata informing him about his new position where he has lost his job and now he is looking for an alternative job. And he also asks her opinion and her mother's opinion about his new state of unemployed, because he is unemployed, right? So in the next part, that is part 13.24, Lata writes back to Haresh motivating him to find a new job, to find a good job, and she believes that Haresh will be able to do that. And then in part 13.27 of this novel, Haresh visits the new firm, that is Praha, and he asks for a job at the Praha Shoe Company. And after a grilling interview, he is finally given a chance to prove himself by the management of the Praha Shoe Company. And finally, he is able to find a job. In 13.30, he gets the job and now he can be seen in his new workplace. In part 13.31, Arun Mehra meets Haresh, where Arun behaves in a very patronizing manner with Haresh because Arun Mehra does a better job, and as we know, Arun is a very judgmental character and he judges Haresh, who works as a shoemaker. Then in part 13.33, a theft occurs at the house of Arun Mehra, and in part 13.34, as we move forward, Meenakshi tries to fix the marriage between Lata and Amit, her younger brother. Then as we move forward in part 13.37, Amit writes his book, his famous novel, which was set in the Bengal famine, and then he dedicates it to Lata. In part 13.37, he once again writes several couplets where each line begins with the 4 initials in the name of Lata, that is L, A, T and A. And the name that he gives to this novel is The Fever Bird, and it is written by the poet and the novelist, the famous poet, the famous novelist Amit Chatterjee, and he dedicates it to Lata. So here part 13 of the novel ends, and now with Haresh's unemployed status and with the arrival of a new novel with Lata's name, and Haresh has and Amit has beautifully dedicated it to Lata, part 13 ends here. And at this point, the readers get the impression that Haresh, with his impulsive nature of leaving his first job, might not appear a very prospective candidate for Lata. And then the appearance of Amit Chatterjee, once again with his novel being dedicated to Lata, makes him as a prospective candidate for Lata. Part 13 of the novel ends with the author suggesting that from this point on, Haresh's chances are less, and now Amit becomes a serious contender and a good prospective candidate for Lata's hand. It seems as if Haresh is now losing the battle. So part 13 ends here. Next we have part 14 of the novel. Now part 14 of the novel represents the politics and the immediate political atmosphere of the times in which it was set. So Seth very characteristically and realistically describes the mood in the post-independent era when Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and the Indian National Congress were the main parties in the Indian political scenario. Part 14 also shows the political and the ideological crisis in India at that time in the run-up to the first general election in the early 1950s, as we know. Part 14.16, in this part Mahesh Kapoor visits the Nawab's Haveli, that is also known as the Baitar House. He visits Baitar House. The Nawab informs Mahesh Kapoor of the plan to make Waris. And who is Waris? As we remember, who was introduced earlier on, he was the servant. And the Nawab mentions that Waris can act as a proxy. He can run for the post of MLA from Baitar Salim constituency, and he will support Mahesh Kapoor. The Nawab also requests Mahesh Kapoor to fight the election as MLA from Rudhia district. In part 14.18, Waris, Maan and Firoz, all 3 of them go for shooting and hunting in the forests. And in this part it is very clear that the Nawab did not like shooting of peacocks in his forest area. Why? Because peacock is a symbol of a Hindu religious belief, and as we all know, as the readers, as the viewers know, a peacock is closely associated with the Hindu god Lord Krishna. So, but by mistake the 3 people, they kill a peacock. So perhaps what is Seth doing here? Seth is foreshadowing communal tensions at this point to show that some unrest might come in the near future between Hindus and Muslims, and very soon it does. So in part 14.2, we get to know that both Muharram and Dashera in the year 1951, they both will coincide on the same day of 1951. Then in part 14.21, Mahesh Kapoor is very astonished, he is very pleased, I would say, he is very pleased to see that his son Maan Kapoor is extremely popular in Debaria district. Then in part 14.26, we have the discussions that goes on in the state legislative assembly between Begum Abida Khan, the Home Minister and several other ministers and MLAs of the government. So what they do is they basically touch upon the various political and social issues that the state of Purva Pradesh is going through. So the entire part 14 of the novel is based on the political atmosphere of the times in which it was written. And I would say Seth very correctly and very realistically represents the scenario in the post-independent India in the 1950s. So the idea is, so what I can conclude from this is, what all the viewers would agree to is, that the novel is in a way a quasi-historical research work. Isn't it? The novel is a quasi-historical novel which touches greatly on the mood and the history of the early 1950s. Right? So this is Seth's way of writing a historical novel. It's almost a quasi-historical research work, a quasi-historical novel. Now, part 15. Now, part 15 of the novel once again begins with Mrs. Rupa Mehra and her antics, as we know, and her ways of finding a suitable boy for Lata. So she decides to stay in Brahmapur so that Lata may not be able to meet Kabir. However, in a turn of events, she gets to know that later on it is Lata who is performing in the dramatic society of her college alongside Kabir. So in part 15.8, the local Dashera performances are described. Then in a detailed length, the Ram Leela and the various Dashera processions are also described. The Dashera performances that goes on for 10 days before Dashera, it's being celebrated over there. And in part 15.9, which is the next part, we see the local Muharram processions also happening in Brahmapur. And we already know that this year in 1951, both Dashera and Muharram are coinciding on the exact same day. So what happens then is the inevitable. In part 15.11, both the processions meet on the road together, and this causes a very violent communal riot. So people from both sides kill each other, and all of a sudden this reminds us of the partition days just 4 years ago, right? So in part 15.12, as we move forward, a Hindu mob catches Firoz and Man, who both are fleeing from the scene. The Hindu mob asks the religion and the religious identity of both the boys and get to know that Firoz is a Muslim. They leave Man, but they proceed to attack Muslim and possibly kill him. But however, with the brave efforts of Man, both are saved and they both run away, all because of Man. Then as we move forward in part 15.17, Mahesh Kapoor informs Nawab that he will rejoin the Indian National Congress to contest elections once again. Then in part 15.22, in the month of October and November 1951, Mahesh Kapoor gets the ticket to run for elections from Salimpur Baitar. So here part 15 ends. Let us now go to the next part, and that is part 16. So part 16 of the novel goes ahead with the story of Lata. A party has been prepared at the Chatterjee's house, as we know. It is a dinner that the Chatterjees have organized. And part 16 of the novel also shows Haresh at his new workplace. In part 16.13, on the occasion of Christmas, Haresh has organized a lunch with the Mehras, and he has made these extremely elaborate preparations, spending a huge amount of money on this extravagant lunch to impress the Mehras. So Haresh takes great care of impressing each and every one in the Mehra household. Then in part 16.15 of the novel, Arun expresses his desire to fix the marriage between Lata and Amit Chatterjee. As Amit is more modern because of his intellectual upbringing, he believes Amit is more suitable. But Savita, the elder sister of Lata, comes there and she says that Lata should make her own choice. Then in part 16.19, both Amit and Lata, they both get out of the house to roam around, and it is clear in this part that Lata does not love Amit. Amit kisses her, but she does not respond to him in the same way that she did to Kabir. The next part, that is part 16.20, begins on the new year of 1952. Pran and his family are watching a test match in January 1952. Then in 16.22, both Lata and Haresh are talking, and then out of a sudden misunderstanding by the word mean, Haresh gets up and exits the room. It was just a general misunderstanding on the point of Haresh, but he gets offended and leaves the conversation. And at this point of time, Lata starts having double thoughts about Haresh. She thinks, and rightfully so, that if they cannot communicate properly, then how will they conduct a successful married life in future? And Mrs. Rupa Mehra is also upset, and then she also starts having double thoughts about Haresh. So at the end of part 16 of the novel, Malti writes a letter to Lata that Kabir was seen with some other girl at the local coffee shop. She suggests to her and gives the impression that Kabir is involved romantically with some other girl, and that Lata should move on and forget Kabir. So part 16 of the novel ends here with the impression that with Kabir ousted and both the mother and the daughter having double thoughts about Haresh, the field is now set for Amit to emerge as the most suitable boy for Lata. It appears as if Amit will be selected, as both the other candidates are on a clear back foot. Next is part 17 of the novel. Now part 17 of the novel goes back to the past of December 1951. In part 17.3, Rashid informs Man that Tasneem is in love with Rashid, and she sends him letters and asks Man to inform Saida Bai that he will agree to marry Tasneem if she desires. In 17.5, the mood of the elections is getting high. The Nawab's servant, that is Waris, will act as a proxy for Mahesh Kapoor, and Waris was basically chosen so that he can shift the mood of the people in favor of Mahesh Kapoor, so that Mahesh Kapoor can easily win the elections. This is because Waris has a hold on the people and he can persuade people to vote for Mahesh Kapoor. Then in part 17.12, Maan notices that Firoz was visiting the Baitar house and he believes that both Saida Bai and Firoz are involved in a romantic relationship and that she is hiding this from him. Out of sudden anger, he almost attempts to choke Saida Bai with his bare hands and almost kills her out of jealousy, and then he goes on to stab Firoz. So basically, he sees Firoz there and in a state of confusion, he believes that Firoz was there to meet Saida Bai and then he stabs him out of anger. Then in part 17.13, the readers get to know that Tasneem is not the sister but rather the daughter of the Nawab of Baitar and Saida Bai. We get to know that at the young tender age of 15, the Nawab Sahab sexually assaulted Saida Bai and the result was the birth of Tasneem. And then Firoz is shifted to the hospital, who is battling for his life. Very soon Maan realizes his mistake and he runs away from the scene and runs away from Brahmapur itself. Then in part 17.16, the novel comes, the police comes to Saida Bai's home and the entire scene is narrated to the police and a warrant has been issued against Maan. Later on, Maan himself surrenders to the police and is put behind bar. Then in part 17.24, the author informs us that both the past history of Saida Bai, where the sexual assault happens, and the readers are informed that the result of this was the birth of Tasneem. She is therefore the daughter of both Saida Bai and Nawab, therefore half sister of Firoz himself. The readers also get to know that Saida Bai's house was given to her by the Nawab as a reparation, as a compensation for his grave crime. In part 17.25, after seeing her young son behind the bar, Mrs. Mahesh Kapoor dies out of grief. So the sexual jealousy of Maan and his rash act of stabbing Firoz has led to the death of his own mother, that is Mrs. Mahesh Kapoor, and very soon it will lead to the defeat of his father Mahesh Kapoor. So all the tragedies happened due to Maan's action of stabbing Firoz and the aftermath of the situation. And look at what Waris does. In part 17.33, Waris uses this chance to rise up as a hero, and in a very shrewd manner he emerges as a cunning politician and influences the public of Salimpur against Mahesh Kapoor. Next, in 17.33, Waris decides to run as an independent from Salimpur constituency against Mahesh Kapoor, and then in part 17.34, Nehru comes to campaign in Salimpur for Indian National Congress and Mahesh Kapoor is extremely thankful to the Prime Minister. So therefore, the last few pages of part 17 of the novel is an accurate quasi-historical narrative of the 1950s, and it shows the mood of the Indian population, the Indian culture, the Indian village in the run-up to the general election of 1952. So part 17 is extremely important because of the realistic representations of the political atmosphere of the times in India. It also represents, I would say, the situation of the caste politics that runs in the rural villages of India. So part 17 ends here. So what I'll be doing is now I'll be going on to part 18 of the novel. Now, next up, part 18 of the novel shifts the focus once again to the story of Lata and Amit Chatterjee. So in part 18.2, Amit is invited to the English department at Brahmapur University for a poetry reading session. And we all know that Amit is a very popular poet. He's a poet of the masses, people love him. The people at Brahmapur University, they love him. He has a great fan following. So Amit gives a speech there on poetry and the state of poetry in contemporary India. And he is also very well received by everyone. And as we know, Amit he's extremely popular and he recites his poems and everyone tries to talk to him at Brahmapur University. Then comes part 18.5, which is the conversation between Amit and Lata, where Amit tries to propose and convince Lata for marriage, but Lata does not yet give any convincing answer as yet. Amit is hopeful of Lata's agreement, but she has still not said yes. Neither she has refused Amit at this point. So in the next part, that is part 18.6, Mrs. Rupa Mehra is also having double thoughts about Haresh because of the way that he reacted on a small word such as mean. So in the earlier parts, if the readers remember, Lata called him mean in a playful manner, but Haresh got upset because of some misunderstanding. Then in part 18.6, Mrs. Rupa Mehra all of a sudden starts having double thoughts about Haresh and his profession. She all of a sudden starts thinking about the negative image that Haresh's job might have in the society for Lata. Very soon Malti comes, she realizes that she gave the wrong information to Lata about Kabir. Malti got the news from her friend that Kabir was with some other girl at the coffee shop, and upon closer investigation it was found that the girl who was seen with Kabir in the coffee shop was Malti herself, who in the preceding parts of the novel tries to meet Kabir and discuss the affair of Lata and Kabir. So Malti realizes that she has made a great mistake and that he was not involved with any other girl romantically. So in part 18.13, the results of the election come in. It's a close fight between Waris and Mahesh Kapoor, and we get to know that the Waris, the servant of Nawab and the former aide, the ally of Mahesh Kapoor, in a surprising turn of events has defeated Mahesh Kapoor and the Indian National Congress, and surprisingly he has won as the elections as an independent. So he uses the political mileage and the news of Man Kapoor stabbing Nawab's son Firoz against the father and generates the support of the local villages and defeats Mahesh Kapoor, the political stalwart, by running as an independent candidate. So Mahesh Kapoor's political career is almost over from here onwards. Then in part 18.27, two letters have arrived for Lata. One is from Amit and the other is from Haresh. The letter from Amit is basically a proposal where he proposes Lata through his poetry, and after reading the letter, Lata wonders whether it will be a right decision to marry Amit or not, and wonders at what kind of life she will have if she marries Amit. But one thing is clear for Lata, that she did not love Amit the way she had loved Kabir. Here I will end the lecture, and in the next part of the lecture I'll be going on from part 18.18 of the novel, where she reads the second letter from Haresh Khanna. Till then, keep watching. I'll see you very soon in the next part of this lecture. Thank you.